Let's talk about the third question. The question is, how did my production skills develop throughout the process of this magazine? I want to divide that answer into four parts. So, four different elements that were able to help me and that I was able to progress in within the progression and evolution of this magazine. The first were people skills, the second was the idea of software and technology, the third was hardware and the use of camera and compositions, and the fourth was the production and shooting itself. So, those are the things that I'm going to talk about later within this video, so I hope you tag along. And for the first element of my production skills, the people skills, through creating surveys and through talking to people in my community, I was able to actually learn how to talk to people and how to create a safe environment for my audiences to actually give me that feedback. And through that, I was able to gather data that I later incorporated within my magazine. I was able to have a deeper understanding of even the Katora mindset, which is something that is specifically talked about within my magazine. And I was able to do all of these things by engaging with my community. So I do believe that in terms of my productional development, people skills are something that I really learned throughout the process of this magazine. In terms of the second element of where I was able to grow my production skills and where I was able to develop, software was completely a thing that something that I was very, very new at and something that I did not have a very deep understanding of. So I started out my journey by essentially using Microsoft Paint in order to create the cover pages for my magazine, in order to create the layout for my magazine. So a few things that kind of helped me understand Adobe Photoshop and more advanced softwares were YouTube, researches on the internet, and the third and foremost, the most important things were my media studies course. So through my classes, I was able to learn how to actually use Photoshop. So while exploring things on Paint, I was slowly able to gradually move to Photoshop and gradually gain a better introduction to advanced software. So by the end of learning software, through my class assignments and creating multiple iterations of different sort of magazine designs, different sort of feature articles, I was able to polish my skills. So if you notice on my blog, I have different sort of practice activities. So those were essentially just me exploring Photoshop in its own and exploring the idea of advanced software through my media studies course. So that is, at the end of the day, software is something that I would completely attribute to media studies and my magazine. At the end of the day, I was able to use Photoshop for my advanced magazine, for my final magazine, where I talk about literacy. So if you look at my final magazine, I was able to incorporate text in a very synergetic way where it complements the cover page, and the layout was something that I was able to make on Photoshop. You can find all that details and that entire journey on my blog. So the third element of production skills was honestly the hardware and how to actually use technologies such as phones, cameras in order to encapsulate the content of my magazine. So essentially, I was a phone user. I used to use my camera to capture all images. I used to whenever I go out and make a video. So coming from that perspective and then going to using a DSLR and learning what a mirrorless camera is, it was a very big learning curve for me. So essentially in class and through YouTube and the internet, I was able to learn about different sort of compositions and essentially learn about different sort of movements that I could incorporate within my video. Through the evolution of this magazine, I was able to understand how to actually operate my phone's camera, even my DSLR, and how to actually have knowledge of what a DSLR camera is and what a mirrorless camera is. So learning about specific settings such as ISO and shutter speed and actually how to adapt to different sort of lighting and how to create lighting was essentially things that I learned through my media studies course. And while shooting for this magazine, it was incredibly important for me to know my camera settings because I was going into a very naturalistic environment where the light would shift every now and then, where I had to shift through different sort of settings and different sort of subjects again and again, and I could not have the same shot again. So having that sort of limitation with my camera and knowing how to actually adapt to different sort of settings was something that I was able to learn through YouTube and my media studies course. At the end of the day, it is important to know that none of my progress within production skills or within the understanding of my hardware would come without the knowledge of knowing how to frame my camera. So I can have any sort of hardware in the world, but media studies and particularly the evolution of this magazine taught me different sort of compositions. So particularly two important compositions that I do love to use within my work was the rule of thirds, where I'd imagine 4 lines on a square and have my subject within the middle, and that is something also used within my cover page of the magazine. And the second was negative space. So while going through the evolution of this magazine and having different iterations, I learned that I need to take photos that have negative space to incorporate my typography later on in post-production. So that is how my production skills have evolved through my media studies process and the evolution of my magazine. The fourth element that I learned through the production process of my magazine was actually the production and shooting itself. So going to a school and actually casting kids and interviewing them was something that I had to learn, and then talking to kids themselves and then painting variations of different sort of flags and different sort of symbolisms of youth on their face to conclude which one I liked best, and then using props and makeups to create an image was something that I kind of learned through media studies by creating different sort of iterations and creating different sort of researches and getting inspired from different sort of production pages and different sort of magazines on the internet. So that was something that I learned throughout the process of this magazine, and I was very grateful to learn all of those.